Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Our top story: the FBI seizing 1.6 tons of the deadly drug fentanyl.
That's enough fentanyl to kill a third of the American populace, 115 million Americans.
And President Trump targets China as a top drug producer just before heading into talks with Chinese leader Xi Jinping. The Wells Fargo banker is back in the U.S. after being banned from leaving China. An expert calling Beijing's actions hostage diplomacy. A China-based billionaire is in the crosshairs. Two lawmakers are calling on the Treasury Department to probe his ties to the Chinese Communist Party and how he may be sowing political discord in the U.S. And a longtime member of New York's Chinese dissident community admitting to spying for Beijing. He secretly monitored fellow activists while presenting himself as a critic of the communist regime. FBI Director Kash Patel says Tuesday the U.S. has seized more than 1.6 tons of fentanyl off the streets this year. That's enough doses to kill a third of the U.S. population.
We've taken over 1,600 kilograms of fentanyl off the streets. Maybe one of the greatest achievements we have this year, 1,600 kilograms of fentanyl. That's a 25% increase from the same time last year. To put things in perspective, that's enough fentanyl to kill a third of the American populace, 115 million Americans.
Patel says the agency is also targeting companies in China that make fentanyl precursors. This comes after President Trump designated more than 20 countries as responsible for producing or transporting illicit drugs into the U.S. That list includes China, India, Mexico, Panama, Venezuela, Peru, El Salvador. Trump warned these countries to cut off the supplies or face serious consequences. He also announced plans to speak with Chinese leader Xi Jinping about a deal on TikTok. Most fentanyl precursor chemicals come from China, then are sent to Mexico for processing. From there, they enter the U.S. through the southern border. Trump said China is also a major supplier, fueling global epidemics of other synthetic narcotics, including nitazenes and methamphetamine. He said he added tariffs on China to hold Beijing accountable. He also said Chinese officials can and must do more to cut the chemical flows. A Wells Fargo banker is reportedly back in the United States after being blocked from leaving China. The banker Chen Yumao, an American citizen, was barred from travel earlier this year. Beijing accused her of being tied to a so-called criminal case. One source says Mao has already left China. Her release followed negotiations between U.S. and Chinese officials just ahead of a scheduled call Friday between President Trump and Chinese leader Xi Jinping. Ye Yaoyuan, a political science professor at the University of St. Thomas, says China often detains people on espionage or economic crime charges. Yet the charges often lack transparency or evidence and are usually more for diplomatic leverage. He calls the practice hostage diplomacy. Two lawmakers are asking the Treasury Department to look into a China-based billionaire. They say he is working on behalf of the Chinese Communist Party to sow political discord in the U.S. NTD's Stephania Cox spoke with congressional correspondent Melina Weisskopf for details.
Some lawmakers are asking for a probe into a China-based billionaire with ties to leftist groups. What can you tell us about that?
So, Steph, this revolves around a man named Neville Roy Singham. He's currently living in China. He's a self-described socialist, and lawmakers are saying that he plays a key role in funding and organizing leftist groups. They also say he's the main backer behind the Marxist group Party for Socialism and Liberation that these lawmakers claimed had organized nationwide protests, including those riots in Los Angeles recently. Congressman James Comer, the chairman of the Oversight Committee, and Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna are conducting a broader investigation into the Chinese Communist Party's attempts to create division here in the United States through political disruption. They're accusing Singham of acting on behalf of the Chinese Communist Party to enact the CCP strategy to divide and conquer, or in the words of analyst Martin Perbrick, make internal disputes amongst the enemy so deep that they become distracted from the conflict. So these lawmakers are now asking the Treasury to formally investigate Singham after Singham ignored the committee's previous inquiry, Steph.
Yeah, and much of legislation addressing the Chinese Communist Party in recent years in Congress has been bipartisan, so we'll be watching this closely as well for updates. Thank you so much. NTD congressional correspondent Melina Wisecup.
A longtime member of New York's Chinese dissident community has admitted to spying on fellow activists for Beijing. Yuan Juntang pleaded guilty on Tuesday to working with China's intelligence service while publicly presenting himself as a critic of the Communist Party. Here's the story.
Tang was a regular at protests outside China's Manhattan consulate and even founded a pro-democracy group in Queens. But federal prosecutors say behind the scenes, he was gathering information on Chinese American activists, even photographing demonstrations. Authorities believe Tang cooperated with Chinese officials in hopes of being allowed to visit family back home. The FBI called his actions a betrayal of American values and of the very ideals Tang once claimed to champion. Tang previously spent 12 years in a Chinese prison for his role in the Tiananmen student movement before escaping to Taiwan and then the U.S.
After Charlie Kirk's death, Utah Governor Spencer Cox is warning about active foreign adversarial bots online. He says there are bots from Russia, China, all over the world, and that they are trying to instill misinformation and encourage violence. NTD's Stephanie Cox spoke with retired U.S. Marine Colonel Grant Newsham, a senior fellow at the Center for Security Policy, to discuss the threat.
Let's start with the tactics that Governor Cox is pointing to. What does it look like here with these bots?
Well, what you've said is just right. It's just a tactic. It's using social media, the electronic platform, to attack, to influence, manipulate, and using the usual sort of, say, social media accounts, messaging, in order to amplify what's just happened, to sort of arouse passions, particularly on the left side, but the right side as well, the Russians and the Chinese, but the Chinese in particular, they're the ones who do it at scale. What they're trying to do is to tear the nation apart, and it's part of a larger strategy you'd refer to as entropic warfare, to break down, degrade, and that is what they're doing to the target. And it's just, in one sense, it's really just the mental manipulation which takes place in all over social media, and we're seeing it. It may not be the biggest threat we've got, but it certainly does exist. It's part and parcel of how the Chinese operate.
Many people are speaking of this particular tragedy as a kind of cultural turning point. Are you seeing anything different in the tactics or the kind of bots being applied here to sow discord as you have described it?
Well, not really. And this actually goes back a very long time. Just the method is different. The method is more high tech. The Chinese, for example, way back in the 60s, if not before, had ties with Black liberation movements, the forerunners of today's Black Lives Matter. So this really is nothing new, and they have the connections today with Black Lives Matter. And this is not hard to figure out, not hard to see, but it is part of the MO. And it's you're weakening your target, you're degrading him. And it used to be done entirely by, say, human-to-human contact or even by the written word. But now you have the electronic media that is being used. But say this goes back decades, nothing new, part of a long-standing, well-organized assault on the United States and its freedoms.
And we're also seeing some prominent voices within China and even Russia's Kremlin spokesman saying there's so much polarization in the U.S., seeming to point at the flaws, perhaps as they would frame it, inherent in the system. At least the Chinese commentators are saying that kind of thing. What use does this serve them?
Oh, it just stokes the flames. And they don't quite know how it's going to pay off, but it's a long sort of constant drumbeat about the ills of capitalism, ills of democratic society. And say it's nothing new. It's just the manner in which it's being done. You know, it does have an effect over time sometimes, and with social media in particular, because that's where people seem to be addicted, and they start to think that they're thinking for themselves, yet it's a very useful tool for influencing people. There's a reason why the Chinese communists have banned these social medias in China, because they don't want it being done to them. They know it can be effective if you do it elsewhere. But this sort of this criticism of the American system, democracy, that has been just ongoing for years. But you'll note that we have an illegal immigration problem. Nobody wants into China or to Russia, of course.
Now, I mentioned earlier the Kremlin has made a statement directly when it was asked about this Charlie Kirk assassination. Why has the Chinese regime not mentioned anything directly, but they have instead let other voices within China bubble up and not be censored to voice perhaps what could be assumed to be the regime's opinions?
Well, that's how they do things. And if you just read even the English translations, which are actually the ones best for an English language audience, just read those for a week and you will see that there's plenty of references to Charlie Kirk. And nothing is done, nothing is said in the People's Republic of China without the implicit and explicit approval of the Chinese Communist Party. So they're getting their word out. But they're making it look like they've had nothing to do with it. And it's just Chinese people speaking. But no, this is all very much the Chinese state speaking to us. There is no distinction between things like Xinhua and Global Times and the Chinese Communist Party.
Amid rising tensions with China, Taiwan this week released a new civil defense handbook. It focuses on preparing citizens to defend themselves in case of a Chinese attack. A senior official at Taiwan's defense ministry explains why the handbook matters.
In
the case of the Chinese military invading Taiwan with force, it could be hard for civilians to distinguish between our soldiers and the Chinese soldiers due to long distance, the environment and background. The Chinese soldiers could even dress in our uniforms to mislead Taiwanese people.
The handbook stresses that if an invasion occurs, any claim that the Taiwanese government has surrendered or been defeated is false. It also gives instructions on how to use the radio if the internet goes down and where to go, like police stations or local authorities, to get verified information if radio broadcasts aren't available. The director says the handbook isn't meant to cause panic. It's designed to help people stay safe in a crisis. Taiwan plans to distribute 5,000 hard copies soon. The handbook will also be available for download online. After Taiwan released its new civil defense handbook, Beijing is signaling its own stance. This week, China is holding its top annual security summit, the Xiangshan Forum. Military experts and officials are discussing regional and global defense issues. In an interview, a retired Chinese lieutenant general said Beijing isn't seeking weapons specifically for attacking Taiwan, adding that its goal is to annex the island without using force. He also said that if a hot war cannot be avoided, an invasion of Taiwan wouldn't require advanced weapons. Regular arms would be sufficient. Coming up, Australia is making a push against China's influence in the Pacific, revealing details in its defense communique with Papua New Guinea.
We made conscious choice that Australia remains our security partner of choice.
Chinese ships and jets popping up near Alaska, with aircraft carriers conducting training in the Western Pacific. A closer look at Beijing's push into the Indo-Pacific. And tensions rising between China and the Philippines. Chinese vessels reportedly fired water cannons at Philippine ships near the disputed Scarborough Shoal.
Coercing, threatening, carrying out unlawful behavior that is pretty much normal for the Chinese government.
That and more in just a minute here on China in Focus. Welcome back to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. A challenge for China in the Pacific. Australia and Papua New Guinea signing a defense communique on Wednesday. The deal strengthens and expands their military cooperation.
We made conscious choice that Australia remains our security partner of choice. We have no choice but to live side by side. We have been living side by side. We'll be here forever.
The two countries signed the communique after a plan for a defense treaty fell through. The treaty would have required Australia and Papua New Guinea to commit to each other's defense as allies. Papua New Guinea said it didn't have enough cabinet members to approve the treaty, while Australia said it would be signed once both countries' cabinet processes were complete.
We have been agreed on the words in this treaty. We have not had a new alliance in more than 70 years. This is a very significant agreement.
This comes after Australia failed to secure a security deal with Vanuatu, another country in the Pacific. These nations sit along key sea lanes northeast of Australia, which are vital for keeping access open if the U.S. were to come to Australia's aid in a conflict. China has been expanding its influence in the region in recent years. Australia stepped up its diplomatic efforts after Beijing signed a security deal with the Solomon Islands. The Chinese military is pushing further into the Indo-Pacific, a region long dominated by U.S. and Western navies. 2 weeks ago, 2 Chinese research vessels operated more than 200 miles off Alaska. The U.S. Coast Guard deployed a patrol boat to keep an eye on them. This comes just a year after 4 Chinese warships appeared near Alaska. The Chinese ships were in international waters, but still within America's exclusive economic zone. An exclusive economic zone is an area of sea from a country's coast where it has rights over fishing, drilling, and other economic activities. The U.S. exclusive economic zone stretches 200 nautical miles from the U.S. shoreline. Months later, the U.S. and Canada intercepted 4 Chinese and Russian nuclear bombers near Alaska. The U.S. officials said it was the first time the 2 countries were intercepted while operating together. The bombers were on a joint patrol over the Chukchi and Bering Seas near Alaska. And for the first time in June, 2 Chinese aircraft carrier groups conducted training in the Western Pacific. This shows Beijing's growing ability to conduct large-scale operations beyond the first and second island chains. The 2 island chains play a key role in Washington's efforts to curb Beijing's influence. They form lines of defense that help prevent China from launching submarine-based nuclear attacks toward the U.S. Geopolitical analyst Sam Kessler told the Epoch Times that China's carrier operations could be normalizing its presence beyond the first island chain. The Philippines is accusing China's Coast Guard of unlawful behavior in the South China Sea. The comments come a day after Chinese vessels reportedly fired water cannons at Philippine vessels near the disputed Scarborough Shoal.
It's common sense. They were firing water cannons both from behind and from the front, and they were maneuvering around the vessel. It was inevitable that the vessels would hit each other. But again, it was not intentional. It was actually China's lies, once again hiding their unlawful and bullying activities in the Scarborough Shoal. Coercing, threatening, carrying out unlawful behavior that is pretty much normal for the Chinese government.
A spokesperson for China's Coast Guard said Tuesday's encounter involved more than 10 Philippine ships. He accused the vessels of crossing into Chinese waters. The Philippine Coast Guard said it was on a mission to resupply more than 35 Philippine fishing boats at the shoal. China claims almost the entire South China Sea, but a 2016 international arbitration ruled that claim invalid. Beijing has rejected that decision. And with President Trump set to visit South Korea next month, relations between the 2 countries back in the spotlight. After the recent raid in Georgia, where do things stand now, both economically and strategically, in the face of an aggressive Beijing? We bring on Morse Tan, former U.S. Ambassador at Large for Global Criminal Justice and Dean of Liberty University School of Law, for insights. For the most part, historically, South Korea has been pretty strong U.S. ally. It's also a democracy, but there are those instances, as you're talking about, of, the CCP influence, pro-North Korean influence inside of South Korea. So where do we go from here?
Well, the people of South Korea and the people and government of the U.S. have had good relations for a long time. It's an alliance forged in blood and steel and fire, if you will. And so that remains strong. However, the South Koreans have lost their democracy due to election fraud. So there is an illusion of democracy right now, even as the front door, the back door, the windows have all been open wide to the CCP and to North Korea. And so the present regime is involved in communizing South Korea. And so they do not reflect the people. They do not reflect the good relationship that has been there. They are anti-American. If you look at the Lee Jae-myung, what he's said and done over a lifetime, and what the people that he's putting in, these are anti-American people. It's very easy to find, calling Trump crazy, calling the U.S. an occupying force, all these sorts of things. There is a lot of background information in terms of where they actually stand. And so as the Trump administration increasingly becomes aware of this, I think for the sake of the people of Korea, there has to be an addressing of the leftist seizing of the key levers of power and influence and authority in South Korea. This is a fake, illegitimate government, and one that is staunchly anti-American. And I'm glad that the Trump administration is becoming increasingly aware of this and is starting to take action along these lines.
Of course, we lightly touched on the economic angle between the two, right? There's hundreds of billions of dollars so far promised in investments, including some from Hyundai itself. That was about 26 billion from Hyundai Motor. Now, in terms of more broadly, though, there's also a security angle here, because currently there's actually U.S. troops alongside South Koreans and Japanese doing joint drills. That, of course, is in the face of increasing aggression and belligerence from Communist China, but also North Korea in the region. How do you see these countries working together more in the face of that growing threat?
Yeah, I think the trilateral cooperation is very important. And it's a very important deterrent to CCP and North Korean aggression. And so I think that is a good step that is continuing on. And I think that, if anything, that needs to be nurtured, that needs to be enhanced, that needs to be increased. And so I think President Trump and the Trump administration need to try to, if anything, expand that and see what the Xi Jinping administration tries to do in potentially resisting that, undermining that, or even potentially at some point cutting that off. But it's very important. It's a very good thing that there is that trilateral cooperation. It should be increased, strengthened, and enhanced.
Ambassador Morris Tan, as always, thank you so much for joining us.
Glad to join you.
That's all for today's China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. If you have any feedback on the show or have something you'd like to see us cover, send us an email at chinainfocus@ntd.com. We'd love to hear from you. Round-the-clock original news coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.